You think you can just walk around like you belong here? Officer Scott's voice sliced through the air, dripping with disdain. Alicia Green, a black woman in her mid-30s, stood frozen in the middle of the street, her hands cuffed behind her back. The bright daylight of the early afternoon bounced off the surrounding buildings, creating an almost surreal contrast with the oppressive tension building in the air. The bustling noise of the city, with cars honking and pedestrians talking, felt distant, as if the world had momentarily stopped just for her. Alicia's face remained calm, her eyes fixed on the officer, the disdain he had for her only sharpening the sharpness in her gaze. She wasn't afraid, not for a second. Not because of the cuffs, not because of the officer who had clearly judged her before even asking a question. Alicia knew exactly what this was. It was a game of power. And she had been here before. She wasn't a victim, not today. She wouldn't allow it. You've got the wrong person, Alicia spoke evenly, her voice carrying an undeniable authority. Officer Scott scoffed. Wrong person? The only thing you're wrong about is thinking you can stand here, acting like you own the place. His eyes narrowed as he stared down at her, his voice rising. I don't take orders from criminals. A small chuckle came from the onlookers. Alicia ignored it. She wasn't a criminal. She was far from it. But to him, a white officer, she was just another black woman to be humiliated, to be pushed down. But this wasn't just any day for Alicia. This was the day she would make a call that would change everything. The call that would tear his world apart. Alicia looked past the officer's aggression, beyond the people around them. She knew exactly what would happen next. The officer didn't know who she was. He didn't know what she did, who she had access to, and most importantly, who was watching her. He didn't know that the moment he placed those cuffs on her wrists was the moment he sealed his own fate. Her hand brushed against her phone in her pocket. Without another word, she reached into her jacket, her movements deliberate but smooth. She pulled out her phone, still locked, and quickly dialed. No panic. No rush. She knew what this call would do. With a flick of her thumb, the number was dialed. As it rang, Alicia's mind raced through all the steps she had taken to get here. The research, the long hours spent reading through documents, the months of building her case against corrupt officers like Officer Scott. He didn't know it, but today was the day that Alicia Green, the woman he'd underestimated, would bring the hammer down on everything he thought he could get away with. The phone call connected, and a voice on the other end answered immediately. Alicia? David Taylor's voice, calm and assured, came through. Alicia didn't hesitate. David, it's done. It's time. There was a brief pause on the line, then his voice, now sharp, came back. Are you sure? Yes, Alicia replied. It's time. You know what to do. Without waiting for another word, she hung up the phone and slid it back into her pocket. Officer Scott had no idea. None of them did. The tension around them had built to a fever pitch. The onlookers were starting to murmur again, some unsure of what was happening, others watching with bated breath. Alicia didn't let the situation overwhelm her. She stood tall, her shoulders back. She wasn't about to let a man like this dictate her fate. Officer Scott looked at her, his expression one of arrogance, but it faltered as he watched Alicia's calm demeanor. He took a step forward, clearly ready to escalate the situation further. He was confident. Too confident. He didn't realize that the phone call Alicia had just made would be the catalyst that would bring him crashing down. Within minutes, the sound of sirens grew louder. Alicia didn't flinch. Officer Scott turned, his head swiveling toward the approaching sirens. But by the time the black SUV screeched to a halt, the damage had already been done. The door opened, and out stepped David Taylor, the well-known federal prosecutor. Officer Scott's eyes widened as David walked towards them, a cold, determined expression on his face. David's voice cut through the growing silence. What seems to be the problem, officer? Alicia, still calm, didn't move, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. She had called in the cavalry. She had called in the people who would not only end Officer Scott's career but dismantle the entire network of corruption he was part of. As the situation unfolded, Officer Scott's bravado faltered. He looked between David, Alicia, and the growing number of federal agents who had just arrived. The room, the crowd, the air, it all shifted. Alicia Green wasn't the victim today. The man who had underestimated her was. Alicia had made a call that no one saw coming. And in that call, she had made sure that justice was no longer a dream but a reality. The world would know her name, and Officer Scott's would soon be forgotten. Justice was served, not with violence, not with screaming, but with a call, with patience, and with the relentless pursuit of truth. I can feel it, the subtle shift in the air. The officer's arrogance was starting to crack as the federal agents surrounded him. His once confident stance began to waver as the reality of the situation settled in. Alicia could see it in his eyes. He was starting to realize that this was not an ordinary day, and she was not an ordinary woman. With every passing second, the tension in the air grew thicker. Alicia stood motionless, the handcuffs tight but her demeanor unshaken. She could feel her heart steady as the sound of footsteps grew louder behind her. She didn't need to look. She knew exactly who was coming. David Taylor, the federal prosecutor, walked up to her side. He had always been a pillar of strength in the legal world, and now, standing beside Alicia, he seemed like an immovable force. "It's over, Alicia," he said softly, but the weight of his words carried through the air. Alicia nodded once, acknowledging the battle they had won, but she didn't let herself smile. "Not yet." "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady and calm. The moment wasn't over. Not yet. The crowd around them had fallen silent, watching in stunned disbelief as David stood next to Alicia, towering over the officer who had dared to humiliate her. Alicia's gaze never wavered from Officer Scott, who was now visibly shaking. His shoulders slumped, and his head hung low as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. The federal agents, now in full force, approached him, their presence sending a clear message. Alicia didn't speak to him directly. She didn't need to. Everything she had wanted to say had already been conveyed through her actions. As the agent stepped forward to arrest Officer Scott, he finally turned his gaze to Alicia. His eyes were wide with shock, disbelief written all over his face. You were that important," he stammered, his voice trembling. Alicia didn't respond. She didn't need to. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut on his wrists was the only answer he needed. The realization was slow, but it came in waves, crashing over him with an intensity that made him shrink in on himself. He had just humiliated a woman he had no idea was a force in the legal world. He had underestimated her, and now, he was paying the price for his ignorance. Alicia watched as the agents led him away. She didn't feel any joy, no sense of triumph. She felt something much deeper, relief. Relief that justice had been served. Relief that the system, for once, had worked the way it was supposed to. And relief that this would be the last time Officer Scott would ever make a mistake like that again. As they walked past her, Alicia's gaze flicked to the crowd. She could see their eyes, wide with amazement, as they slowly began to understand the truth. The officer who had thought he could get away with his actions, who had believed his badge and skin color would shield him, was being led away in disgrace. Alicia didn't speak to the crowd. She didn't need to. They knew. They knew exactly what had just happened. The balance of power had shifted, and for once, the truth had triumphed. The whispers in the air seemed to quiet down as David turned to Alicia. "You did it," he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Alicia gave a small nod. She didn't need to say anything. This was the moment she had worked for, the moment she had known would come. The moment when the tables turned and the system, for once, didn't fail. As the agents moved Officer Scott into the back of the federal vehicle, Alicia turned her attention to the city around her. The sun was still high in the sky, casting its warm light over the streets, but for Alicia, the world felt a little bit brighter today. She had faced the darkness, and she had won. Justice, after all, wears many faces. And today, it wore hers. I had no idea how long I had been standing there, but it felt like an eternity. The silence that had followed the agent's departure with Officer Scott still hung in the air, thick and heavy. The sounds of the city, the usual hustle and bustle of people going about their day, seemed distant, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting. I stood there, motionless, my gaze lingering on the now empty street. The echoes of the moment still played in my mind, like a song on repeat. The sense of finality was almost overwhelming. David was beside me, watching me carefully, as if waiting for some kind of acknowledgement. But the truth was, I didn't know how to react. There was no joy in my heart, no celebration. There was only the quiet, undeniable feeling of justice being done. And that was enough. "Are you okay?" David's voice broke through my thoughts. I nodded without looking at him. "I'm fine. Just taking it all in." I glanced back at him, my face unreadable. "It's over." David nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah. It is." We stood there for a moment longer, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The aftermath of everything that had just happened was settling over us. And while Officer Scott's career was effectively over, I knew there was still so much more to do. This was just one battle in a much larger war. A war for truth, for fairness, for equality. The kind of war that had been fought by people far braver than me, people who had never seen the recognition or reward for their efforts. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I took a deep breath and finally broke the silence. "We've still got work to do, David. The system's broken." This was just the start. He turned to face me, his eyes steady, unflinching. "I know. And we're going to fix it. Together." His words, simple as they were, felt like a promise. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe it. The tension in my chest that had been building since this whole ordeal began finally eased just a little. There was hope. Real hope. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to embrace fully, but standing here now, I knew we were on the right path. I glanced back at the now empty street where Officer Scott had once stood, his arrogance and ignorance on full display. I couldn't help but wonder how many more officers like him were out there, thinking they were untouchable, thinking they could get away with anything. How many people had suffered at the hands of the system, just like he had tried to make me suffer? I shook my head, pushing the thoughts away. It was over for him. It was over for the people who thought they could use their power and privilege to harm others without consequence. But the real work was just beginning. The road ahead was long, and the battle would be tough, but I was ready. David was right. We were going to fix it. And we would do it one case at a time. "What now?" David asked. I looked at him, a determined glint in my eyes. "Now, we take down the next one." The city around us seemed to come alive again, the sounds of life returning, the hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians. It was a reminder that the world keeps moving, no matter what happens. But for me, the moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. I had faced the darkness, and I had won. And no matter what came next, I was ready. Because I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been underestimated, who had ever been silenced, who had ever been treated like they didn't matter. I was fighting for justice. And that fight, I would never stop fighting. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet of the morning. I glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. I had barely slept, but I knew what awaited me today. The weight of the past few days had been heavy, but the world had not stopped. The calls, the meetings, the endless push for justice. I answered the phone without hesitation. "Alicia," David's voice came through, smooth and urgent, "we need to talk. It's happening sooner than we thought." I sat up, my mind immediately alert. "What's going on?" I asked, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. "I just got word," David continued, "there's another officer. A part of the same network. He's been tipped off, and he's trying to flee." My heart raced. The system, the corruption, it was all falling into place, but it also meant that the fight was far from over. I stood up, my mind already shifting gears. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rising adrenaline. "We don't have much time. He's at the airport, about to board a flight out of state. We need to intercept him before he disappears." "I'm on my way," I said, already pulling on my clothes. I didn't need to ask for details. I knew exactly what had to be done. David wasn't just calling to update me, he was relying on me to handle this. I grabbed my phone, checked the time, I'd need to move quickly. I couldn't afford any delays. The airport was 30 minutes away, but the distance felt like nothing compared to the stakes of the situation. The drive was a blur. I was focused, my mind running through every possible scenario. Every step of the operation had to be calculated, every move deliberate. This was what I did. This was why I had spent years working my way up, learning the ins and outs of the system, understanding how it worked, and how to take it down from the inside. When I arrived at the airport, I was met by a team of federal agents, their faces grim but ready. They knew what was at stake here, just like I did. Alicia, one of them, Agent Roberts, greeted me, his tone serious. "We've got him cornered. He's about to board. We'll need to move fast." "Lead the way," I replied, already feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over me. We made our way through the crowded terminal, the noise of travelers and announcements filling the air. I kept my head down, moving with purpose. My focus was on the task at hand, blocking out the distractions. As we reached the gate, I saw him. Officer Carter, the one who had been tipped off, the one who thought he could outrun the consequences of his actions. He was standing in line, checking his phone, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. The agents closed in, surrounding him. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. "Officer Carter," I said, catching his attention. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Alicia Green," he stammered, taking a step back, clearly recognizing me. You can't do this." "I didn't, you've been running long enough," I interrupted, my voice unwavering. "It's over." The look on his face was a mixture of fear and disbelief. He had thought he could escape, thought he could hide. But he couldn't. Not anymore. The agents moved in, and as they began to escort him away, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This was what it felt like to finally take down one of the people who had abused their power, who had helped to perpetuate the corruption I had been fighting for so long. As Carter was led away, I turned to David, who had appeared by my side. "One more down," he said, his voice low, almost in relief. "But it's not over," I replied, my eyes scanning the airport, my mind already thinking ahead. "There are more. And we'll keep going until it's all gone." David nodded, understanding what I meant. We couldn't stop. Not until the system was dismantled, piece by piece. As I stood there, watching the agents take Carter into custody, I knew this was just the beginning of something bigger. The fight for justice wasn't a single battle. It was a war. And I was ready for it. The world was full of people like Officer Scott, like Carter, who thought they could hide in the shadows and abuse their power without consequence. But I wasn't afraid of them. Because now, I had the strength, the resources, and the determination to make sure they faced the consequences of their actions. I was no longer just a lawyer. I was a force to be reckoned with. And I wouldn't stop until the system was fixed, until those who thought they were untouchable were held accountable. It didn't matter how long it took. I would see it through. And as I walked out of the airport, the sun setting on the horizon, I knew that this was only the beginning. I had barely stepped out of the airport when my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with a new message from David. "We've got a bigger problem. Meet me at the office." I didn't need to ask any more questions. I already knew what it meant. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but with every victory came a new challenge, a new fight. I had just taken down one of the officers, but there were many more waiting in the wings. The ones who thought they were untouchable. The ones who had spent years building their empires of corruption. I hopped into my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. My mind raced, replaying every detail of the operation so far. Each win was a step closer to what I wanted, but it felt like the closer I got, the more resistance I was going to face. The stakes were rising, and I could feel the pressure building. As I pulled into the parking lot of the office, I saw David's car already parked. He was waiting inside. I walked through the door and straight into his office, where he was standing by the window, looking out over the city. "What's going on?" I asked. David turned, his face serious. "I just got word. There's a leak. Someone in our operation is tipping off the people we're trying to take down." My stomach dropped. A leak? That meant we had a mole in the ranks. Someone who was betraying us, giving information to the very people we were working to expose. "Who?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rising anger inside. "We don't know yet," David replied, walking over to the desk and sitting down. "But the timing's too suspicious. Every time we get close, they manage to escape." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "So what do we do now?" "We have to find the leak," David said, his voice firm. "We can't afford any more slip-ups. If they find out what we're planning, it's over." I took a deep breath, thinking through our next steps. This was the kind of thing I'd been preparing for. It wasn't just about taking down the corrupt officers anymore. It was about protecting the work we had already done. If we couldn't trust everyone in our own ranks, then all of this would crumble. "We'll need to go through everything," I said. "Every conversation, every piece of intel we've gathered. Someone is feeding information, and we have to find out who." David nodded. "I'll pull the files. We'll start tomorrow." I nodded back, but as I turned to leave, a thought crossed my mind. "David," I said, pausing at the door. "We're getting too close. We need to be careful who we trust from now on." David didn't respond immediately, but I could see the understanding in his eyes. This wasn't just a battle against the system. It was a battle against betrayal. And betrayal came from the places you least expected. The next few days were a blur. We worked around the clock, digging through files, tracking movements, looking for anything that could connect the leaks to someone inside. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Someone had been undermining our efforts. Someone who knew exactly what we were doing. It made me more paranoid than I'd ever been. The feeling of being watched, of being followed, was becoming a constant companion. I didn't trust anyone now. And yet, we were so close. The final pieces of the puzzle were right in front of us. The moles had to be removed, but the rest of the operation had to move forward. It was a delicate balance. Finally, after days of searching and questioning, we found our lead. A name appeared in the records that shouldn't have been there. Officer Jenkins. He had been working in the background, showing up at key moments, always just a step behind the people we had been tracking. It was him. The leak. I felt a rush of emotion as the realization hit me. He had been feeding information to the very officers we were trying to take down. And now, it was time to end it. We moved quickly. David got in touch with the right people, and soon, we had enough evidence to take Jenkins down. We had a plan, and this time, we weren't going to let anything slip through our fingers. The day we took Jenkins down, the weight I had been carrying for weeks seemed to lift. The operation was back on track. The system was still broken, but we had made a huge dent in it. I stood in the office, watching the city outside, the sounds of the world still going on. It was a beautiful day, but the beauty was hard to appreciate. There was still so much work to do. And as long as the corruption existed, I knew I couldn't stop. But today, we had won. And it felt good to know we were one step closer to the justice we had been fighting for. The system would bend, but it would never break. Not while I was here. The days after taking down Officer Jenkins felt strangely quiet, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something else to happen. I wasn't used to this kind of calm. I was used to the constant rush of chasing leads, tracking down people, and piecing together the broken parts of a corrupt system. But now, it felt like we had entered a new phase. We had hit a major milestone, but the fight wasn't over. Far from it. We were getting closer, but there were still many more pieces to uncover. The pressure was mounting, and every step forward felt like it led to an even bigger challenge. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were getting closer to something big, something dangerous. But I had no choice but to keep moving forward. I didn't have time for fear. We couldn't afford it. That morning, David called again. "Alicia, we need to talk," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "What is it now?" I asked, already feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "I just got off the phone with the team," David replied. "We've got a new lead, and it's a big one. We've been following a pattern, and it points to someone high up." I stood up from my desk, instantly alert. "How high?" "Too high," David said, his voice low. "This isn't just a few bad apples anymore. This is something much bigger." I walked over to the window, looking out at the city, the skyline framed by the morning light. "Who are we talking about?" "It's an official at the federal level. Someone who's been covering up the whole network." I felt the air go still, like the ground beneath me had just shifted. A federal official. This was the breakthrough we had been waiting for, but it also meant we were about to go up against some serious power. The kind of power that could make things very difficult for us. "We've got to move fast," I said. My mind already working through the logistics of what needed to happen next. "I'll get the team ready." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This wasn't just about taking down officers anymore. This was about exposing the very heart of the corruption we had been fighting for so long. A federal official could mean the entire system we were trying to fix was rotten to its core. It wasn't just the police now. It was everything. The magnitude of it was overwhelming, but I knew we had to keep moving. We had come too far to stop now. I met with David and the team later that day. We went over the evidence, the files, the patterns we had traced. The more we looked, the more it became clear, the corruption ran deep, and it had been hiding in plain sight. We had always known it was there, but now, we had proof. "We've been looking in the wrong places," David said, tapping the file on the table. "The higher-ups have been pulling the strings this whole time." I nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words. "So, what do we do now?" "We go after them. We expose them for who they really are." I could feel the weight of his words settle in the room. This was it. This was the moment we had been preparing for. We weren't just fighting officers anymore. We were fighting an entire system that had been built to protect its own. The plan was set in motion quickly. We couldn't waste time. Every second mattered. We gathered intel, spoke with informants, and used every tool at our disposal to dig deeper into the network. The pieces were coming together faster than I had expected. But as we closed in on our target, the stakes grew higher. Every move we made felt like it was being watched. There were moments of doubt. Moments when I wondered if we were doing the right thing, if we were really ready for what was coming next. But I had to remind myself why we were doing this. Why it mattered. We were fighting for something bigger than ourselves. We were fighting for the people who had been silenced, for those who had been oppressed, for those who had been ignored for far too long. As the day wore on, we finally had everything we needed. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. It was time to act. I walked into David's office, my heart pounding in my chest. "We're ready," I said, my voice steady. David stood up, his expression grave. "Let's finish this." We moved swiftly, assembling the team and preparing for the final confrontation. The federal official who had been pulling the strings, hiding behind a mask of authority, was about to be exposed for what he truly was. It was a risky move. A dangerous one. But we had come too far to back down now. As we made our way to the location, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come. How many people had suffered because of the corruption we were about to bring to light? I felt the weight of it all, but I also felt something else, a sense of determination. We were going to finish what we had started. We were going to take down the people who thought they were untouchable. And we were going to do it together. The fight wasn't over, but we were closer than ever to winning. The city felt different that evening, quieter, almost as if it were waiting for something to happen. The sky had begun to darken, the once bright day fading into the soft hues of dusk. I stood outside the building, my breath steady, my heart beating at a constant rhythm. The team was already inside, preparing for what we knew would be the most crucial step in the operation. We had everything in place. The evidence was irrefutable. The pieces we had spent months gathering were finally coming together, and this time, there would be no turning back. I could feel the weight of what we were about to do. This wasn't just about taking down a few corrupt officers anymore. This was about exposing an entire network, a system of power that had been operating in the shadows for far too long. It was about justice. Real justice. And it was about time. As I walked into the building, the air inside felt thick with tension. The team moved quickly, their faces a mixture of determination and focus. There was no room for hesitation now. We had to act fast. Everything is set, David said as he looked up from the table where he was reviewing the files. His voice was calm, but I could see the fire in his eyes. He was ready. We go in, get the information, and shut it down. No mistakes. I nodded, feeling the same sense of urgency in my own chest. Let's get this done. We moved through the building, our steps synchronized, our focus sharp. The plan was simple: get to the heart of the operation, take down the key players, and dismantle the network. But nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. The closer we got, the more I could feel the tension rising. We were about to go after someone who had been hiding in plain sight for years. Someone who thought they were untouchable. And I couldn't help but wonder how many others there were, waiting in the shadows, still thinking they were above the law. But we were here to change that. We were here to prove that no one was untouchable. Not anymore. We reached the door to the office. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was it. Everything we had worked for, everything we had fought for, was about to come to a head. I turned to face the team. Stay sharp, I said, my voice low but steady. We can't afford any mistakes. This is our moment. The door opened, and we flooded into the room. The federal official was sitting at his desk, his back to us. He didn't even flinch when we entered. He knew we were coming. He had been expecting us for a long time. I could see it in the way he held himself, in the way he didn't even bother to stand. He knew the game was up. Alicia Green, he said, his voice smooth, his tone dripping with arrogance. I've been waiting for this. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. I just walked forward, my eyes locked on his, my expression unreadable. You think you can just do whatever you want, don't you? I said, finally breaking the silence. You think you can manipulate the system and get away with it? The man smiled, a cold, calculated smile. What are you going to do, Alicia? You're just one person. You can't take down the entire system. Watch me, I replied, my voice unwavering. It was then that the agents moved in, surrounding him. His smile faltered, and I saw the fear in his eyes for the first time. He hadn't expected this. He thought he was safe. But he wasn't. Not anymore. As the agents cuffed him, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The fight had been long, but we had finally won. Justice was being served. The man who had thought he could operate above the law, hiding in the shadows, was now being exposed for the world to see. He was no different than any of the others we had brought down. He was just another cog in a corrupt machine, and now that machine was being dismantled. As we walked out of the building, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. We had done it. We had taken down the system, piece by piece. The corrupt officials, the bad cops, they were all going down. But as I looked around at the city, at the people still going about their lives, I knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much work to do. The system was still broken. But we had made a dent. And for the first time, I felt like there was hope. True hope. We had shown that justice was not just a dream. It was a reality. And no matter how long it took, no matter how hard it got, I wasn't going to stop until every last piece of the corrupt system had been taken down. The morning after our victory, the weight of the past few days seemed to finally catch up with me. It wasn't just the case, the sleepless nights, or the constant planning. It was the realization that we had done something that hadn't been done before. We had started a chain reaction that couldn't be undone. The people who had manipulated the system, who thought they could hide behind their power, were now being exposed. It was a small victory in a much larger war. But even so, it felt like the calm after the storm. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was David. "Alicia," he said, his voice urgent. "We've got a situation. You need to come in." My pulse quickened. I knew something was coming. "What's going on?" I asked, my mind already racing. "There's a new lead. Someone who's been tied to the network we've been taking down. It's big." I could hear the tension in his voice. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, I said, grabbing my coat and heading out the door. The streets were quieter than usual, the early morning fog lingering like a veil over the city. I drove in silence, my thoughts swirling. This was the kind of lead we had been waiting for. It felt like every step we took brought us closer to the people who had built the walls of corruption around us. But the closer we got, the more dangerous it became. I pulled into the parking lot and walked into the office. David was standing by the window, looking out at the city below. He didn't turn as I entered, but I could feel the weight of his focus. "What's the lead?" I asked, stepping into the room. He turned to face me, his expression serious. "It's a name. Someone who's been playing both sides. Helping us, but also feeding information to the people we're trying to take down. We've been tracking them for weeks, but now we've got enough to act." My stomach tightened. "A double agent. Do we have the evidence?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. "Not yet," he said. "But we're close. We need to move fast before they realize we're onto them." "Let's go," I replied, my voice steady. We gathered the team, preparing for the next move. We couldn't afford any mistakes. We had come this far, and now, there was no turning back. The closer we got to exposing the higher-ups, the more desperate they would become. But I knew that we had the strength to finish this. We had the resources, the determination, and most importantly, the right people. We drove to the location where we believed the double agent would be. The city seemed to pass by in a blur as we got closer, the adrenaline building in my chest. I knew this was a pivotal moment. If we could take down this person, we could strike a serious blow to the operation. If we didn't, we would risk losing everything. We parked a few blocks away and moved in quickly. The silence around us felt almost suffocating. I could feel the weight of every decision we had made leading up to this moment. It was all coming down to this. We walked into the building, our movements coordinated. Every step we took was calculated. We couldn't afford to make a single misstep. As we reached the room, I felt a sense of anticipation building. We were about to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. The double agent would finally be revealed. I opened the door and stepped inside. There, standing in front of us, was the person we had been hunting. I stared for a moment, trying to process the sight before me. I had expected this person to be someone with a completely different face, someone I could never have imagined. But there they were, standing in front of us, their expression unchanged, as if they had been waiting for us all along. You think you've won, the person said, their voice calm but filled with an undeniable edge. You're just another pawn in this game. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't let it show. This was it. This was the moment when everything would be revealed. Not anymore, I said, my voice unwavering. The person's gaze shifted slightly, but they didn't move. You're just a small part of something much bigger, they said, their words carrying an air of finality. But I didn't back down. You're wrong, I said. This ends now. I looked around at the team, who had already begun securing the area. The game was over? The person who had been feeding information to the corrupt system was no longer a threat. As the agents moved in to arrest them, I took a step back and let out a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. This was it. The system was starting to crack, and we were the ones pushing it to fall. As we walked out of the building, the weight of the moment finally hit me. We had done it. But I knew this was just one victory in a long fight. There would be more challenges ahead. More pieces to uncover. More people to expose. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance. A real chance to make a difference. And I wasn't going to stop until we had dismantled every last part of the system that had been built to keep the powerful in charge and the oppressed silenced. The following days felt like a blur. We had made a significant move by uncovering the double agent. But the truth was, the deeper we went, the more complicated everything became. It was as if we had cracked open a door to a hidden world, and now, there was no turning back. The higher-ups were starting to get nervous. They could feel the ground shifting beneath them, and they weren't going to let it happen without a fight. I knew that we couldn't afford to get comfortable. As soon as we made one breakthrough, another obstacle appeared, bigger and more dangerous than the last. I spent sleepless nights going over the files, trying to connect the dots, trying to see the whole picture. We had the names, the faces, and the connections, but they were still scattered pieces. We needed to tie them together. David kept pushing me, urging me to stay focused. This is just the beginning, he would say, and every time he spoke those words, I could feel the weight of them. Once we expose this, they won't let us just walk away. I didn't need him to remind me. I could feel it in every move I made, in every conversation I had with the team. There was no turning back now. We had come too far. But the pressure was starting to get to me. The constant tension, the never-ending race against time, it was wearing me down. I would spend hours, days, sifting through information, trying to uncover something new, trying to find that one piece of the puzzle that would bring it all together. But every time I thought I was getting closer, another door closed. It was maddening. I met with David again one evening, after another long day of chasing leads. "What do we have?" I asked, my voice tired but still holding on to the determination I had carried from the beginning. David sat back in his chair, looking more worn than usual. "We've got a breakthrough. There's a meeting coming up with some of the higher-ups in the system. We don't know the exact details yet, but we have enough to know it's significant. This could be the moment we finally expose everything." I looked at him, searching his face for any hint of doubt. There was none. "How long do we have?" "Not long," David replied. "We need to act fast. This is our window. Once this meeting happens, it will be too late. They'll go into hiding, cover their tracks, and we'll lose our chance." I stood up, pacing across the room, trying to keep my mind sharp. "Then we don't wait," I said, turning back to face him. "We go in now." We worked quickly, coordinating with the team, getting the necessary resources, and preparing ourselves for what would be the most critical part of the operation. As we gathered the final pieces of information, I could feel the weight of everything we had done and everything we were about to do. This was the culmination of months of work, of endless hours of sacrifice and struggle. We were so close, but the closer we got, the more I realized that the stakes had never been higher. We weren't just fighting for justice anymore. We were fighting for the future, for a system that had long been broken but now, for the first time, was starting to crumble. We arrived at the location for the meeting, a quiet, unassuming building on the edge of the city. It was the perfect place for them to hide, for them to make their deals without anyone noticing. But we weren't going to let that happen. As we prepared to move in, I could feel the tension in the air. This was it. The moment we had been waiting for. I glanced at David, who was standing beside me, his face set with determination. "We're doing the right thing," I said, more to reassure myself than him. "This is what we've been working for." David nodded, his gaze focused. "We won't stop until it's done." The operation went off without a hitch. We moved in swiftly, surrounding the building and securing the exits. Inside, the higher-ups were meeting, their conversations hushed but tense. We didn't waste any time. We gathered the evidence, recorded every word, every deal, every corrupt action that had been taking place behind closed doors. By the time we left, we had everything we needed. The system they had built was about to come crashing down. We weren't done yet, but this was the moment that changed everything. As we walked back to the car, the weight of the situation finally hit me. The fight was far from over, but we had just made a massive dent in the wall of corruption that had stood for so long. The city, as silent as it had been in the moments before, now seemed to breathe again. It was only a small victory, but it was the first real sign that change was possible. The rest of the world might not know it yet, but we had started something big. We had proven that the corrupt system could be taken down, piece by piece. And we weren't stopping until it was all gone. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The operation had been a success, but I knew this was far from over. We had the evidence, we had the names, but now we had to make sure it was enough. There were still people in power who would do anything to protect themselves. They wouldn't go down without a fight. I sat at my desk, staring at the files spread out before me. The paperwork seemed endless. Each document held another piece of the puzzle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. We were close, but not close enough. The door opened, and David stepped inside. "Alicia," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the situation. "I think we need to push harder." I looked up at him, already knowing what he meant. "How?" "There's someone in the system who can give us the final piece. We've been following their trail for weeks. It's time to move in." I stood up, feeling the urgency in his words. This wasn't just about collecting evidence anymore. This was about striking at the heart of the system, the one person who could bring everything crashing down. "Let's do it," I said, already reaching for my coat. David followed me out, the team gathered and ready. We had a plan, and we were going to execute it. The building we were heading to was familiar, a place that had once felt like a fortress. But today, it felt different. It felt like the walls were finally starting to crumble. As we made our way through the hallways, I couldn't help but think about everything that had led up to this moment. The late nights, the risks, the sacrifices we had made to get this far. It had all led to this final confrontation. We reached the office, and I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. This was the one we had been waiting for. The person who had been orchestrating the entire operation from behind the scenes. I could feel my pulse quicken as we entered the room. There, sitting at the desk, was the person who had been pulling the strings. They looked up at us, calm and collected, but I could see the flicker of recognition in their eyes. They knew this was it. "Alicia Green," they said, their voice cold, but with a hint of something else. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything down?" I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. I just stood there, letting the silence fill the room. The weight of everything we had uncovered, everything we had worked for, hung in the air. Finally, I spoke. "It's over," I said, my voice unwavering. "You've been hiding behind your position for too long. It ends today." The person stood up, their expression shifting, but they didn't make a move. They knew they were caught. They knew it was over. The agents moved in, surrounding the room, ensuring that nothing went wrong. As they arrested the person, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. We had done it. We had exposed them. But as the person was led away, the weight of it all settled in. This wasn't just one victory. This was the beginning of something much bigger. We had broken the system open, but now it was time to rebuild. There were still cracks to fix, still people in power who would fight to keep the old ways intact. But we had proven something. We had shown that the system could be taken down. The fight wasn't over, but we were closer than ever. I walked out of the room, my mind focused, the plan ahead already taking shape. We would continue. We would rebuild, piece by piece. And we would make sure that the system that had once kept the corrupt in power would never rise again. The next few days passed in a haze of paperwork, meetings, and briefings. The arrest of the federal official was a major step, but we knew it was just one part of a much larger picture. The system was crumbling, but it wasn't going to fall easily. There were still powerful people out there, people who wouldn't go down without a fight. But we had proven that even the most untouchable were vulnerable. We had taken down one of their own. And that was enough to send a clear message. As I sat at my desk, going over the final reports from the operation, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. We had come so far, but there was still so much left to do. The fight wasn't over yet. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I looked at the screen, it was David. Alicia, his voice came through, tense and urgent. "We've got another problem." I leaned forward, feeling my heart rate pick up. "What is it?" "There's a new lead. We've traced another link, a major one. But this time, it's personal," David said. "I think you need to hear this." "I'm on my way," I said, grabbing my coat and heading out the door. The familiar hum of the city filled the air as I made my way to David's office. It had been a few days since the last major move, and I had started to believe, maybe for the first time, that we could actually pull this off. But I knew better than to let my guard down. Every victory had its price. When I arrived, David was waiting for me, a folder in his hands. He handed it to me wordlessly. I opened it, scanning the contents quickly. The name jumped out at me. "No," I whispered under my breath. "Not him." It was a name I never thought would come up. A name I had never expected to be tied to this mess. "He's been playing both sides," David continued, his voice grim. "He's been involved in all of this from the beginning, and now he's circling back." My mind raced as I processed the information. This wasn't just any person. This was someone close to me, someone I trusted. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. "I didn't want to believe it either," David replied. "But we have the proof now. It's him." The anger and betrayal burned in my chest, but I pushed it aside. "We go after him," I said firmly. "We expose him just like everyone else." David nodded. "We need to act fast. If we wait too long, he'll disappear." The familiar feeling of urgency settled over me, but this time it felt different. This wasn't just about stopping someone we didn't. No. This was personal. We had to get this right. The team worked quickly to gather the evidence, to track the movements, to piece together the web of connections that had been hidden for so long. The tension was unbearable. I could feel it in every meeting, in every conversation. No one could afford to make a mistake now. We were getting closer to the endgame, and the stakes had never been higher. As the hours passed, the picture became clearer. The connections we had traced led to one final meeting, one last confrontation. I could almost feel the weight of the decision in the air. If we moved in now, we would have everything. If we waited, we risked losing it all. There was no more time for hesitation. "We do this now," I said, standing up, ready to move. The team followed, every member focused, every step calculated. We couldn't afford to fail. We arrived at the location, the quiet, nondescript building where the meeting was set to take place. As we moved in, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was it. This was the moment we had been waiting for. I felt a cold knot in my stomach, but there was no turning back. We were in too deep, and now we had to finish what we had started. The door opened, and we flooded the room. There he was, standing in the middle of the room, as if waiting for us. The look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He knew. He knew we were here to expose him. He knew we had everything we needed. But he didn't move. "Alicia," he said, his voice calm, almost dismissive. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything from me?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just stared at him, letting the weight of everything we had uncovered hang in the air. The people he had betrayed, the lives he had ruined, everything had led to this moment. "It's over," I said, my voice steady. "You're done." As the agents moved in to arrest him, I watched, not with satisfaction, but with a strange sense of closure. This was the final piece. This was the person who had been pulling the strings from the shadows, the one who had been responsible for so much. And now, he was exposed. The fight wasn't over, but it felt like we had crossed the final threshold. We had made it. The corrupt system was falling, and we were the ones who had taken it down. But even as I watched him being led away, I knew the real work was just beginning. We had won the battle, but the war wasn't over yet. There were still more people to expose, more cracks to uncover. But for the first time in a long time, I could feel a sense of peace. We were on the right path. And no one, no matter how powerful, would be able to stop us now. The days following the arrest of the final key figure felt like a momentary pause in the chaos that had consumed my life for months. We had exposed so much, taken down the people who thought they were invincible, but I knew the real work was still ahead. The corrupt system was crumbling, but it wasn't going to disappear overnight. The battle was far from over. I sat in my office, staring at the stack of files before me. The team had done their part, the evidence was irrefutable, but there was something about the weight of the situation that still felt unfinished. There were still unanswered questions. Who had been helping the ones we had taken down? Who else was involved? And how deep did this go? My thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of my phone. I glanced at the screen. It was David. "Alicia, we need to talk," he said, his tone urgent. "What is it?" I asked, already bracing myself. "It's about the next step," David replied. "I've been going over the files again, and I think we missed something. There's another connection, something bigger than we originally thought." "What do you mean?" I asked, standing up and walking over to the window. "We're close, Alicia. We're closer than we've ever been, but we need to move quickly. There's a new player in the game. Someone who has been in the shadows this whole time." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who?" I asked. "I don't have all the details yet, but I know it's someone who has been pulling strings from the very top. And if we don't act fast, we risk losing everything we've worked for." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration bubbling up inside me. "We can't afford to let this slip. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I didn't need to hear more. I grabbed my coat, feeling the weight of the situation settle over me. This wasn't just another lead. This was the final chapter. If we could expose this last figure, we would have destroyed the core of the corruption once and for all. I arrived at the office to find David pacing, his face etched with worry. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steady. "We've traced the new lead," David said, handing me a folder. "It's a name we never thought we'd see." I opened the folder and stared at the name printed on the page. It was someone I had never suspected, someone who had always seemed so far removed from everything we had uncovered. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered. "How could they be involved?" "It's the same pattern," David said. "They've been in the background, orchestrating everything without anyone realizing it. They're the ones who've been keeping the system intact." "How do we know they're still involved?" I asked. "We have enough evidence to make a move," David replied. "But it's risky. If they're as untouchable as we think, we could lose everything." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "We have to move now. We can't wait any longer. The team was assembled quickly, and we made our way to the location where we believed the figure in question was hiding. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing on me as we got closer. This was it. The final confrontation. The person who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning, the one who thought they were untouchable, was about to be exposed. We arrived at the building, and everything felt different. The air was thick with tension. This wasn't just another operation. This was the culmination of everything we had been working for. We moved in quickly, surrounding the building. The silence was deafening as we made our way inside. As we entered the room, the person stood there, waiting for us. They didn't seem surprised. They knew. They had always known. I stared at them for a moment, feeling the weight of everything we had uncovered. This was the final piece. This was the person who had made everything possible, who had ensured the system remained intact. And now, it was over. You think you've won, they said, their voice calm but filled with arrogance. This is just the beginning. You can't take down the whole system. You can't win. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The silence between us spoke volumes. I had already won. The person who had been pulling the strings was now in our hands. It's over, I said, my voice steady. You're done. The agents moved in, securing the person without hesitation. As they were taken away, I felt a strange sense of closure. The last piece had fallen into place. The system that had been built to protect the powerful was finally crumbling. I turned to David, who was standing next to me. He looked at me, a small, knowing smile on his face. It's done, he said. I nodded, but I knew the real work had only just begun. We had dismantled one part of the system, but there was still more to do. The fight wasn't over. But now, we had a real chance. And we weren't stopping until it was all gone. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, interviews, and court proceedings. The person we had exposed was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and as the case continued to unfold, it became clear that the fight was far from over. The system we had been fighting for so long was breaking apart, but it wasn't going down without a struggle. The corruption that had been entrenched for decades wasn't going to disappear overnight. And while we had taken down many of the people who were responsible for it, there were still those who thought they were above the law, still those who believed they could outsmart us. But I wasn't about to let them win. Not now. Not after everything we had worked for. The team and I continued to dig deeper. We followed every lead, analyzed every document, and interviewed anyone who might have information. It felt like we were uncovering something new every day. The more we uncovered, the more we realized just how deep the corruption ran. It wasn't just the police or the politicians. It was in every corner of the system, from the courts to the corporations. But with every new piece of evidence, with every new name exposed, I could feel the momentum building. The walls were coming down. Slowly, but surely. One evening, after a long day of work, I sat at my desk, staring at the files before me. There were times when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. The pressure to succeed. The pressure to make sure we did things the right way, that we didn't miss a single detail. I had given up so much to get to this point. The long hours, the endless sacrifices. It had all been worth it, but sometimes, it felt like the cost was higher than I had ever imagined. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I picked it up, knowing it would be David. "Alicia," he said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. "We've got the final piece." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "I mean we've got the name. The one who's been pulling the strings behind it all. The one who thought they were untouchable." I felt my heart race. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. The one person who had kept the whole system together, the one person who had orchestrated it all. "Where is he?" I asked, already moving to grab my coat. "We've got him cornered. We need to move now, before he disappears." I didn't hesitate. I knew that this was the moment we had been waiting for. I gathered the team, and we set off, moving swiftly and quietly. As we approached the location, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This was it. The end of the road. The person who had caused so much damage, who had manipulated the system for their own gain, was about to be exposed. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the long nights, the false leads, the moments of doubt. And now, it was finally here. We had made it. The building loomed ahead of us, an imposing structure that seemed to hide its secrets behind every brick. We moved quickly, our steps silent in the night air. There was no room for mistakes now. We had come too far. The team surrounded the building, taking their positions. I could feel the tension in the air as we waited for the signal. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I had done this 1,000 times before. This wasn't the time for fear. It was time for action. The signal came, and we moved in. Every step was precise, calculated. We had one chance to get this right. We reached the office where the person was waiting, their back turned to us. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, watching them, feeling the weight of everything we had uncovered. They had thought they could hide. They had thought they were untouchable. But now, we were here. And everything they had done was about to come to light. You thought you could get away with this, I said, my voice steady but filled with anger. The person turned slowly, their face betraying the smallest flicker of surprise. They hadn't expected us. But it was too late. It's over, I said. The agents moved in, securing them without hesitation. As they were led away, I felt a strange sense of relief, mixed with something else. A sense of closure, but also of realization. We had done it. The system was broken, but now we had the power to rebuild it. As the agents took the person out of the building, I turned to David, who had been by my side every step of the way. It's done, I said, the words finally sinking in. David nodded, his face reflecting the exhaustion we both felt. We've won. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew that the fight wasn't over. The system had been exposed, but it wasn't going to be fixed overnight. There was still so much to do. But today, we had made a real difference. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that change was possible. The future was still uncertain, but now it felt like there was hope. Real hope.